we all know it. It starts the First World War, and the Great Depression, and the Second World War, and Hiroshima, and the Cold War, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it's a fine story. It makes total sense. But it doesn't kind of lead into the world we live in now. You know, this world of, you know, tsunamis of trivia and constant surveillance and fantastic opportunity. It's a truism that all histories are written to make sense of the time they were written. And most of the books about the 20th century were written about 95 in the late 90s. And they sort of make sense of the world where people were, you know, this was the world where, you know, David Hasselhoff was singing on top of the Berlin Wall, and the Germans were really pleased and grateful about that. And that story explains why perfectly. But we've sort of moved on quite a lot since then. You know, that's not really the world we live in. We sort of need a new account, a new story. But it's tricky with the 20th century. It's hard. It's like every innovation and discovery, all you know, all the great achievements up until the end of the 19th century, like, they make total sense to us. We get them. You know, electricity, photography, agriculture, language, all these things, we know where we are with them. It's, you know, we might not know how to make a steam engine ourselves, but there's nothing about a steam engine that, like, you know, gives us the existential horrors. You know, we get it, it's fine. But then you hit the 20th century, and you get relativity, and you get cubism, and you get modernism, and you get quantum mechanics, and you get existentialism, and you get chaos mathematics, you get postmodernism, and all these things. You just think, oh, Jesus Christ, I'll just skip these. I'll just sit this one out. This is a bit hard, man. This is a bit difficult. And that's understandable, but it does mean that we're looking at the 20th century through 19th century eyes. And it ain't going to make a huge amount of sense when you do it like that. But fortunately, all those things, yeah, by themselves, they're counterintuitive and complicated and off-putting. The moment you look at them all together, they make far more sense. There's a simple key that unlocks them all. It's a simple idea that's at the heart of much of what we learned in the 20th century. That idea is a fixed point is arbitrary. You know, a single perspective is not enough to explain things. And that runs through all the great sort of innovations and discoveries. It's certainly at the heart of Einstein, certainly at the heart of a lot of modernism, be that cubist painting, taking many different angles to look at things, atonal music. Throughout that, you know, all those different things, this central notion that a fixed point is just something that doesn't exist in the real world. It's just something that we arbitrarily project onto the world to make sense of it. Because it's run throughout our history. It's run throughout our culture. It's called, historically it was called an omphalos. An omphalos was a fixed point that marked the center of the world. And it could be a stone, or it could be a pillar called the axis mundi, in which the world rotated round. You know, in Greek myths, Zeus wanted to know where the center of the world was. So he released 2 eagles, and they flew through the sky, and where they collided and fell to earth was Delphi. So that became the center of the Greek world, because that's God logic. To Zeus, that makes total sense. So Delphi was the oracle of the ancient world, but only in Greece. You know, for the ancient Japanese, Mount Fuji was the omphalos. For the Sioux Indians, it was the Black Hills. Of course, to the Romans, all roads led to Rome. In the medieval ages, it was Jerusalem. And come the end of the 19th century, it was the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, which marks the direct point at which the stars overhead mark out 0 degrees latitude, the prime meridian, and that was globally agreed to be the centre of the world. There was a big international meeting in the 19th century. People from all countries came together, and it was always a foregone conclusion. You know, America was using Greenwich for its maps. I think 72% of the world's shipping maps are all based on Greenwich as the prime meridian. But not everybody voted for Greenwich. There was a few. France, for instance, France abstained, right? To the French, the centre of the world is called Point Zero, and it's just in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. That's where they wanted the whole world to be measured by, and it's just an example of all these points that are just arbitrary that we sort of choose. And it's not just in our culture that this notion of a fixed point and in our science and our art is important. The whole political setup of the world up until the end of the 19th century, from when time began, was based on this hierarchical thing with a fixed point at the top. This was a world of emperors and tsars and kaisers, and the whole world was divided up. There was obviously the British Empire, the German Empire, the Roman Empire, not the Roman Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the world was either empires or colonial rule by empires. We had a guy at the top, and what was important was our place in the hierarchy. We had to know our place. This was how we understood ourselves. It wasn't if we were a good person or a smart person or an intelligent person. It was where we were. If we were a serf or a general, we had to know our place. And then come the First World War, that all ended. Right, the emperors were gone. The Tsar was shot with his family. You know, it was the way the world had always been run since Alexander the Great, since before then. It was the only way we knew. And then in just a blink of an eye, it went. And so not having an emperor at the top of our society, suddenly, it wasn't a case of knowing our place. Suddenly, we were individuals. You know, we had freedom. We came to understand ourselves from our own personal perspective first, and it was freeing and liberating and wonderful in many ways, but also very dangerous and contradictory and challenging, because the moment you view yourself as an individual, you isolate yourself. You cut off all your ties to the wider social groupings and things. Like in the 20th century, a real icon, what we came to view as just so cool, was something like Clint Eastwood in the Sergio Leone films, The Man with No Name, right? This was an individual so isolated, he didn't even need to know his own name. You know, that's where we were. But here's the thing, with the 20th century, that wasn't the end of the story, right? The whole individual thing was a period that has passed. All the great discoveries and innovations of the second half of the 20th century were moving away from that idea. It was kind of hard to notice, because although the idea that an individual was enough to make sense of things was sort of rejected, biologically and socially and psychologically and culturally, in all these ways. In politics and in advertising, it clung on. The idea that became, certainly after Thatcher, certainly with Blair, with Reagan, this whole neoliberal idea that the way you understood politics was to think of the individual with their aspirations as your central core of politics. But we've changed now. We've really changed quite dramatically. As a good time, when we all networked up now, we now understand ourselves as connected to other people. There's a nice, easy way to work out whether you view yourself as an individual or part of the network generation, which everyone sort of raised digitally has come to see themselves. If you just think of someone taking a selfie, right? Just someone taking a photograph of themselves, taking a selfie. If you grew up in the culture where the individual was primary, you tend to view that as one person taking a picture of themselves for reasons of vanity and narcissism, just persons looking at themselves. If you grew up later, if you're part of the millennial generation, you see it as someone strengthening social bonds. You see it as someone winking at their friends. The idea that it's a photo for an individual to look at themselves doesn't explain what it is. It fails to make sense of what has happened. You have to look wider. You have to look at the whole network to make sense of these. And there's an example of this in the current Labour leadership debate going on. I think sums it up quite well. It's like Tony Blair. He wrote this thing for The Guardian saying about all this huge support, especially from the young, for Jeremy Corbyn. And he was honest to admit, I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense into the way he understands the world. As far as he can see, the best explanation he can get is that, all these, network-connected 21st century, internationally minded generation have come to see the world in the same way as a union leader from carrying out your convenience. And he knows that can't be right, but he doesn't know why. He doesn't know what the difference is. That big shift in the way we see ourselves and understand ourselves, it's sort of unstoppable now. The individualist sort of worldview that Blair is so trapped in, obviously there's a generational lag. It's not going to go away overnight, but it is going to dwindle. It is going to sort of fade away. And this notion that we only make sense when we understand how connected we are, when we understand our reputation amongst other people, that we can only achieve things when we stop to think of ourselves of individuals, is the story we have now. And this is what this history of the 20th century all leads up to. I mean, I'm sure Blair totally understands the narrative of the 20th century that ends with David Hasselhoff singing to the Please Germans on the Wall. He gets that. That makes total sense for him. But we've moved on. We're a entirely different world. So this is an attempt to write a history of the period we've been through that will shed light on now. And that's important. That's why I really love these super weird happenings. This is why I really love everything that Greg and Kermit are putting together. Because these guys know their history. They know the tradition that they're part of. If you ever get a chance to look at Greg Wilson's blog or something like that, these guys understand it. But they're not trapped in it. They're informed by where they've come from. But they're using that to do sort of stuff now. And that just massively appeals to me. So that's why it's a real honour to be here and to talk to you. Before I go, I'd just like to say, I fucking love Portmeirion. It's 4 years ago, it was my 40th birthday. And me and my partner Joanne and our 2 kids, we saved up and we came to stay in the village. If you've never stayed in the village, it's amazing. After about 6 o'clock, and all the day trippers go home, and the thing's all lit up, beautifully, you can just go out and explore anywhere. It's just the most brilliant thing. But this was my 40th birthday. This is the point in time where you're supposed to be having your midlife crisis, and I sort of was, because I had this real sort of undeniable desire to be a writer, right? To write books. That's all I wanted to do. But I was also, a parent, and I had to put, food on the table. I had to put a roof over the kids' heads and things like that. And so I'd concentrate on work because that was the responsible thing to do. But it kept building up in me and building up in me, and I kind of knew I was getting to a point where I had to make a decision. I'd either have to decide that I was never going to do it, or I was going to go, sod it and do it. And I knew enough about how the publishing industry works, right? It's not good for writers. There's a sort of a vague assumption that you should have a second income or be privately wealthy or something if you're going to be a writer. I knew if I was going to go, no, that's it, I'm going to be a writer, I was going to be penniless. But the choice, as I could see it, was if I did that, I'd be penniless. But if I didn't do that, I'd be bitter. And penniless beats bitter any day of the year. And if you've got a irresponsible, life-changing decision that you want to make, making it in Portmeirion, where if you've got a choice between the mundane, you know, and the blazing worlds of your inner life, in Portmeirion, you're never going to choose the mundane. So if you've only got any major life decisions, I believe this is a good place to make them. Thank you all for listening to me. I will have the books over there that I'll be happy to sign, and have a really wonderful festival. And diolch yn fawr Portmeirion. Thank you.